This week, Justin Trudeau is desperately trying to salvage his job by doing a coalition deal with the NDP. But this is the coalition Canadians cannot afford.
Canadians need to pull together and pick a progressive government, not a progressive opposition.
Whether we're in government, which I'd love to be in government, please let that happen. Whether that's in opposition, whether that's working together with others, whether that's in a coalition, whatever it is.
The election campaign is in its final stretch, and the possibility of a minority government seems very real. So how are the parties positioning themselves? At Issue is here for the last Thursday before Election Day. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto. Althea Raj also in Toronto tonight. Okay, certainly the closest race I have ever witnessed, and obviously the positioning around the likelihood that this will be a minority has been interesting to watch this week. What has struck you, Chantal, about the way leaders are positioning themselves?
I have to say that I found the Conservatives a bit hard to follow. At the beginning of the week, Andrew Scheer was saying we're going to have a majority. By today, he was saying whoever has the most seats has the right to govern, which seemed to go the other way. And I'm not convinced that the best approach to sealing this bargain with voters this year is to talk of a majority government or to talk about the first 100 days of a Conservative government or to say we'll be repealing the carbon tax, because the Conservatives can only win next week if the vote against them splinters between the NDP, the Liberals, and the Bloc. If you're giving more and more reason to voters who are still soft to say maybe we should stick with Trudeau by saying things like that, maybe you're not on the right strategy.
And Andrew, if Canadians feel that they need a government on a shorter leash, which is generally what a minority government is, maybe continuously saying you want a majority government isn't the way it works. Although a Conservative said to me last night, how do you ask for a minority government? You don't do that anyway, so which is fair.
Well, there's two factors at play. There's the one factor that Chantal is talking about of keeping the vote, the non-Conservative vote, splintered by being non-scary, but there's also the factor of turnout and making sure you excite your base, get them thinking about things. Some people are going to be scared at the prospect of a Conservative government. Some people are going to be scared at the prospect of a Liberal minority propped up by the NDP and or the Greens. So I agree, it's not conventional. So one possibility is they haven't thought this through. One possibility is they're thinking of things we haven't thought of.
Althea, what do you think?
Or they're not sure what they should be thinking, I think, is probably what explains the Andrew Scheer scenario, different messaging, and frankly, Jagmeet Singh's different messaging. Yes. I'm not sure that the argument we heard from Stephen Harper in 2008 about how coalitions were illegitimate, and the argument we heard in 2011 that you had to vote Conservative to prevent the NDP from forming government propped up by the Liberals, is going to work this time, because you have a Liberal incumbent government. And so if you were scared of the possibility of an NDP Liberal coalition, why wouldn't you just vote Liberal? And I think maybe that explains some of the kind of walk back that we've seen from Mr. Scheer and some of the walk back that we've seen from Jagmeet Singh. But it kind of seems like they didn't expect reporters to go down this route, which is odd to me because we've been going down this route for the last several elections. So it is interesting. I will say, sidebar, it does bother me a lot when we have our political leaders talking about how coalitions are illegitimate and kind of misleading the public about how our system actually works. I don't think that's what our political leaders should be doing.
Well, can I play this Andrew Scheer clip around the party with the most seats gets to govern? Because this is another issue that tends to make some people crazy. So here's what he said about it again today.
It is clear that in modern Canadian history, the party with the most seats forms the government, and that a prime minister who comes out of an election with fewer seats than another party resigns.
So, Chantal.
I think that maybe Mr. Scheer, when he has a spare moment, should call former BC Premier Christy Clark. No, she is not from another century. She was the Premier of BC. In 2017, she actually won the most seats by 2. Tried her luck getting the confidence of the Assembly in Victoria, did not, and last time I checked, the NDP, John Horgan, have been in power since then. Or if that's too recent, we could go back to 1985, a really ancient history in a revolutionary province called Ontario, where the incumbent won 52 seats, the Conservative incumbent, the Liberals 48, and I was there for that, I hate to admit. And Mr. Miller, is the name of the Premier then, tried his luck too, did not get the confidence of the House, and David Peterson became the Premier. So those are not examples from some forgotten constitutional era that Mr. Scheer, as a former Speaker of the House of Commons, would not have had access to.
But presumably, Andrew, he's not saying that because he doesn't know. He's saying it because he doesn't want people to consider, or he wants to make things difficult the day after or the night of.
He wants to, as you're saying. As a matter of convention or constitutional law, he's completely wrong. As a matter of optics and practicalities and arithmetic, it will depend on the numbers.
Yeah.
So right now, if you look at the projections, they're looking at roughly tied, both parties in the low 130 seats. But supposing it comes out with the Tories with 140 and the Liberals with 125, for the Liberals to form a government out of that, they'd have to get the support of not only the NDP and the Greens, but also the Bloc.
Yeah.
That's a pretty rickety contraption, and they'd have to think twice about whether they wanted to form a government in those circumstances. But that's a matter, as I say, of practical politics, optics, and what can actually be done rather than constitutional convention.
But if we're looking at 4 seats, 5 seats, I don't know what the bar would be, but just a number of seats, you could see how Justin Trudeau might make that case. Could you not, Althea, that because he is the incumbent, he gets to try and test the confidence?
I think if he only needs one other political party, like if the NDP has a substantial number of seats and that the seat count is very close between the Conservatives and the Liberals, then it makes sense to me because frankly, I think a lot of Liberal voters would want that to happen. A lot of New Democrat voters who are possible Liberal switchers in the future would like that to happen. And when you actually look at where the parties align themselves in their agenda, I mean, the Bloc is toxic for the sovereignty reason, but in terms of their agenda, so much more aligns. I mean, the Greens, the Bloc, the NDP, and the Liberals are like on one side on most issues, and the Conservatives are on the other. And so I think the public would want them to try to form some sort of arrangement. Yeah. And if it doesn't work, well, then the public has spoken, right? And then we let Andrew Scheer, and obviously this is all hypothetical, try, and then possibly we go back in another election.
Chantal, then Andrew, yeah.
But there's also the issue of Mr. Scheer's capacity, if he ends up with a minority government, of actually surviving the first confidence vote. This week, the Bloc Québécois made it clear that it would not support the repelling of the carbon tax.
Yeah.
That is the position of the NDP and the Greens. So unless Maxime Bernier brings a lot of friends to the House of Commons to help Andrew Scheer, or Jody Wilson-Raybould suddenly wants to join the club that doesn't believe in carbon pricing, which I very much doubt, you could have a Conservative government with 15 seats, more than the Liberals, still not manage to have a viable government.
The one thing that would govern everyone's calculations is partisan self-interest.
You don't say.
And this is how Stephen Harper was able to continue through minorities, even though he had all his parties against him, is when all 3 parties, or in this case all 4 parties, have to pull the lever together to force an election or to bring the government down. It's not always the case that they will see their interests aligning at the same time. When one party is up in the polls, another party is down the polls. The crucial period would be in the short term, because if they were to bring them down immediately, then all kinds of possibilities would open up. The longer they wait, if it were to go 6 months or a year, then you'd be looking at an election, and one party or another might have reason to say, oh, you know what, we don't want to have an election just now. The thing we learned from the 2008 coalition imbroglio, whatever you want to call it, is people tend to punish whichever party, whichever side looks like they're overreaching, looks like they're too hungry for power.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the constraints that all the parties will be having to work under. And the other is, maybe the same point is, of not asking too much, not demanding too much in return for your support. So if anybody thinks that any one party is going to have the absolute whip hand, they all are going to be under the watchful eye of the public. And if any of them look like they're being unreasonable, they will pay a price.
I would just say that there is an overarching issue that is urgent for most of those parties, and that's climate change. And so even if it seems like they're acting in their own partisan political interest, they can say, actually, we're acting because we think we only have 11 years to go to address climate change. And so, great circumstances call from greater action. And so this is why we're perhaps taking extraordinary steps and working together than we would otherwise. And I think that might be a powerful argument for the public.
Okay, can I end on, so we're almost at the end, 4 days to go. Did you think that we would still be this close? I mean, Andrew and I were talking before about the last time it was this close, so I'll let Andrew go first, but did you think we'd be this close?
No, I mean, who knows? I mean, I've never seen an election in my memory where the two main parties were so close all the way through the campaign. Remember back to 2015, where all three major parties were at one point or another in first, second, and third. There were wild swings in the support. This time, both of them have basically been on a slow fade, maybe a rather faster fade for the Liberals than the Conservatives. But I can't recall seeing something quite as static in terms of the relationship between the two major parties.
Althea?
I think if you go back a year, I did not think it was going to be this close. At the beginning of the campaign, though, I don't know, it's been such a weird election with so many bizarre curveballs that I'm not surprised, actually, that it's so tight. And you felt that the summer, like crisscrossing across the country, talking to people, just like kind of the hatred for the Prime Minister was really palpable. But, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago, we thought Justin Trudeau would be cruising to re-election. So it has been fascinating to watch.
Chantal?
Well, yes, Althea is right. Over the summer, you would hear a lot of the anti-Trudeau rhetoric, and it was deep. What I didn't expect in this campaign, I expected more indifference to Andrew Scheer than hostility. But what I've picked up over the past 3 weeks, and it goes some way to explain why they failed to thrive in the polls against the Liberals, is not the great Liberal campaign, but the sense that Andrew Scheer, in all the debates that he's participated in, has not managed to inspire enough trust in enough voters to get where he wants to go.
This is an election that both major parties basically lost. I mean, they're both on present form going to come under 33% in the polls. That's never happened before in our history.
Okay, so on that sad note, even before the election, Andrew's saying everyone's lost. Thank you all.